The Independent National Electoral Commission says it's racing against time to ensure that all the impediments that have hindered credible, free and fair elections in Nigeria are resolved before the 2027 general elections. Part of that plan is a proposal to amend Nigeria's electoral framework that would strip the president of the power to appoint resident electoral commissioners. If it becomes operational, the proposed change would instead give the election management body the power to make these appointments under a different nomenclature to be known as state directors of elections. Dengiefa Angalapu is a research analyst at Center for Democracy and Development. He joins us now to discuss this proposal. Good afternoon and many thanks for joining us here on Newsday.
Good afternoon and thank you for having me.
Of course. Now let's get into the nitty-gritty in terms of the specific details, the constitutional hurdles that must be overcome for INEC to assume control of local elections. Can you enlighten us?
Well, I mean, quite a very simple question, but one that is also very loaded. First off is to say that local government systems are quite an important system of government across the world. So across the world, they play a very big role of political, social, and economic development. However, in Nigeria, the lines are blurred. So rather than see local government play key roles in development, local governments have become, structures of political mobilization and grassroots capture. This is very, very important as we have the conversation on whether or not INEC should be in charge of local government, or the SEC, the State Independent Electoral Commission, should be in charge of local government. One fundamental issue that we've realized is the fact that local governments are not independent, they are not autonomous. We thought that, having a financial autonomy would resolve this issue. But we've come to realize that the financial autonomy that was given by virtue of the Supreme Court judgment has not led to, an independent functionality of the local government. So the basic question has now been, how can we resolve this? And we also, how the local government elections panned out, after the Supreme Court judgment. In every state where you had a state governor, all of the local government officials were simply, when they were elected, they were simply, they followed suit. They were basically members of same parties of the state governors. So it now showed that there is a fundamental flaw in the leadership recruitment system at the local government level. The fundamental question, therefore, is, should INEC be in charge of local government? Would it make it better? You've talked about the legislative provision. It's a very highly political issue. And it's political for two reasons. One, it's because, Nigeria is a federal structure. And when you talk about local government elections and then, INEC taking over, you are going to be hitting at the very core of federalism in Nigeria. First off, let us look at this very critically. Local government are the subnational level of government. So meaning if INEC takes over the conduct of local government, it will mean that, you've actually centralized local government to an extent. Then, it is not even a problem of whether INEC should conduct a local government election or the State Independent Electoral Commission should conduct local government election. The key word I want us to note is the fact that whether both the election management bodies, whether you talk about INEC or you talk about SEC, the very key word is that they are not independent themselves. Right? So if INEC conducts local government election, the fear is that, INEC itself, it has serious challenges of autonomy and dependency, right? So the fear is that through INEC, right, the central government or the government at the federal level would control the state level. Let's not forget, I made a very fundamental point, that local governments in Nigeria, rather than serving as an agent of development, have become agent of political mobilization and grassroots capture. So what people see as political structure at the level of the state, it is simply local government. So if INEC conducts local government election, and INEC itself is not independent, INEC is controlled by the executive arm of government, if they're not independent themselves, right? So it would mean that whoever becomes the president can, through INEC, control the local government system in a way that gives severe problems to governors. So you might see a situation where a governor is elected into power, the local government chairmen or chairpersons are all from the president's political party, because they will be loyal to who controls the election management body. This is what is happening for SEC. Because the state governors basically control SEC, they are now loyal to the state governors. But when INEC controls local government elections, and then INEC is not independent itself, it will mean that federal government will now be controlling local government. At a time where we are talking about the fear of a one-party system, at a time where we are talking about federal intrusion into state and an imbalance in our federal structure, I think that we are not mature for that. Now, a very typical example for this, really, it's when you see, two persons. If you see somebody drowning, right? If you see somebody drowning and you yourself you're not a professional swimmer, if you try to swim to save that person, you realize that you also drown with the person. And even though you have somebody who is a professional swimmer come to the scene, it will mean the case would have been complicated because he is now saving two persons. So the fundamental challenge here is that INEC and SEC are both not independent. So we have a situation where institutions that are not very independent are trying to save another institution that is also not independent. Right? So you see a situation where institutions that are not autonomous are trying to save an institution that is also not autonomous. I think that's the fundamental challenge.
Welcome back to Newsday, and of course we still have our guest, Angalapu. He's a research analyst at CDD. If you're there, hopefully you can hear me now. How would centralizing electoral management affect Nigeria's Federalist principles?
Yes. So yes, that's a very, very important question, and I was actually going there. So I was actually saying that if you look at the federal structure of Nigeria, we are already saying that most of the items are already on the exclusive list. It is so centralized in a way that the federal government has all the powers and all of that. I mean, when we talk about our security architecture, we also talk about how centralized it is and all that. So when you come to our election management bodies, right, and an election management process, I mean, the argument again is that if we centralize local government elections, it would mean that you would have taken control. You would have taken the control that the governors have on the SEC, but then you are now putting it on INEC, And then the challenge is not. I mean, I want to make this very, very clear. The challenge is not who conducts local government election, whether SEC or INEC. The fundamental challenge is that these election management bodies that we have, both INEC and SEC, are not independent. So if local government elections are in the hands of SEC, it will mean that they are controlled by the state governors. If it now comes to INEC, INEC also has some struggle with independence. So it would mean that the federal structures will control local government elections in a way that possibly will affect the governors, because what the governors see as structures currently are the local government, local government chairmen or chairpersons that they have currently. Now, going deeper into the conversation, INEC has raised a very important question, really. The fundamental point they pushed on that I think I completely agree on is the fact that we need to make INEC independent. We need to ensure that the president stops appointing, recs and give that mandate to INEC. I am saying that if that does not happen, if INEC conducts local government election and there is this political interference in INEC, it would mean that whatever the state governors are doing, whatever that is happening at the state level, would have simply transferred that to the federal level and given that federal control. And that, for me, is more problematic, because it would mean that if you have an overzealous president, he would control all the local government structures in a state and to undermine the governor of that particular state. Remember, let's not forget the recent defection in Delta State. When the governor defected, all the local government structures defected with him to show that as of now, the local government structures are loyal to the governors. But when INEC begins to conduct local government elections and INEC is not independent, the caveat, the catchword is that if INEC is not completely independent and then they are under the control of the executive arm of government, it will mean that the local government themselves will begin to retool themselves to be controlled by the federal structures. And again, before you know what is happening, you start having local government chairmen, local government structures that are fighting with their governors because they want to stay loyal to the federal government. So I am saying that one institution that is not independent cannot save another one that is not independent. One institution that is not autonomous cannot save another one that is not autonomous. So INEC and SEC must save themselves before they are able to save the local government system.
Well said. Now, earlier on, you touched on the governor's aspect. I'd like you to elaborate on that, if you don't mind. How might governors potentially resist this likely reduction in their political influence?
Yes. So when I began the conversation, I made a very important point, and I said that will be, the anchor till the end, is the fact that local governments are important structures of development across the world. But in Nigeria, local governments serve one particular purpose, even more than the development purpose that they serve. It is the fact that local governments are agents and structures of political mobilization and grassroots capture. So if you have local government structures in place, it will mean that you are on your way to winning your next election. So when people say local government, look at what happened in Rivers State. The fight between Minister Wike and then, of course, the governor of the governor of the state. It was basically of who controls the structure, that the governor came to dismantle the structure. What does it mean by dismantling the structure? Changing local government chairman and all of that. So the idea is that local government structures are important in capturing the grassroots for elections. Let's not forget, if you look at how a Nigerian election works, no matter how sophisticated the urban areas are, right, the election results, more of the results come from the rural areas. So if you capture the rural areas effectively, you must have delivered your elections. So it means that when governors have local governments, local government chairpersons or chairman in power, it will mean that they are able to capture the grassroots and deliver their next election mandate. So local government are very, very important to governors, and that is why sometimes they deceitfully do not want to conduct local government elections, right? So they have caretaker committees and all of that just to ensure that they control that structure. So if you move that structure to the federal government without ensuring the independence of INEC, you have simply moved the powers of the governors to the federal government, and that I think is more problematic. Let's not also forget that now we have regional development commissions, and what happens is that in some cases, and I've seen that for different groups, you will see the regional development commissions rather than being loyal to probably or working together with the governors in their region, they are loyal to the federal government, right? So they want to deliver the federal government. They are seen as the structure of the federal government. So the ruling party at the federal government also sees that as their structure. So once you're able to take local government into the control of INEC, and if INEC itself is not independent, local government structures become become an appendage of the ruling party at the federal level. So that for me is really my fear.
Interesting narrative there. So what specific resource constraints would INEC face in managing thousands of additional electoral units, you think?
Well, I think that if INEC is well resourced, I think INEC can actually do it. if they are well-resourced and independent, they can actually do it. We've seen INEC conduct area councils election in Abuja, right? Although the scenario is a bit different because you don't have, a subnational government per se in Abuja beyond the minister of the FCT. So that is a bit understandable. So the interests are a bit manageable. But so the thing is that we are already saying that INEC needs to be unbundled and all of that. I think that when we talk about unbundling, we should just talk about, federating INEC a little. So the structure that INEC itself has put up, that you also read in the news, I think is an effective method. One, they should be independent, and then INEC itself should have some kind of federating structure. So you have the national structures, you have the state structures that are that some kind of federating structure. So the state structures reports to the federal structures and all of that, and then you resource them. Give them the necessary support. So for example, all of the sects that we currently have will now be enveloped into the current INEC that we have. I think it's going to work perfectly. But the key word again is that if INEC is not independent itself, it cannot save another institution or organization that is not independent, because a drowning man cannot be saved by another man that does not know how to swim.
Fantastic. You used that analogy twice, and it definitely applies to this situation. Now, how would you say this proposal addresses the fundamental power imbalances that enable local election manipulation?
Yes, so really, I think it does to some extent, really, because if, again, with the key word that if INEC is independent, what we are going to see is that, we are going to see a situation where local government elections will become more competitive. And let's not forget, once it becomes more competitive, you're not going to have a situation where you are having one party win all of the seats in local government. You are going to be having a balanced structure. That will mean that we now have a healthier democratic competition, rather than a mockery of democracy that we have as local government elections currently. It will mean that civil society organizations, NGOs, will now also be more invested in monitoring local government elections, because as of now, investing in monitoring local government elections is almost like a waste of your funding, because we already know the outcome. So I think this structure is going to work if the organization is allowed to function the way it's going to function. And let's not forget, very, very importantly, is the fact that as this year runs out, the tenure of most INEC officials will be elapsing. It will mean that this is the time, if we are talking about transferring these functions to INEC, this is the time for us to ensure that the appointment process into INEC is not manipulated. This is the time for us to ensure that people with character, people with some kind of credibility, good track records are put in INEC. And then this is the time for us to ensure that the legal provisions are made in a way that it is not biased or being favorable to the center, but in a way that it favors both the center and the subnational government. So I think it's going to work effectively, but it must begin with ensuring that INEC is totally independent of political control.
Indeed, on that note, Dengiyefa Angalapu, research analyst, CDD, would like to thank you for your thoughts on those issues. Good to have you with us.